So it's a delight to be here today for the very first build, and thank you, Phil, for having me here. It's a great honour. I want to speak to you, ladies and gentlemen, for a little while this morning about leadership for the smart age. In a moment, we're going to look at cultures, the types of cultures that we as individual leaders can construct, whether it's in business or media or education, whatever it is you lead. And in so doing, not only improve our enterprise, but over time, working together, as Phil suggested, can lead us to the betterment of our society. And we're going to move fairly quickly for time's sake, so strap yourself in a little bit right now. If forward-thinking technologists have their way, within about 25 years of now, we may all be living in what we as futurists call smart towns or smart cities, on streets that we navigate using augmented reality, driving or being driven in cars that are fueled at least in part by big data analytics, on roads where the traffic is managed using the Internet of Things. We may all be living and working in buildings that are basically self-contained hydroponic farms, with walls that breathe to allow us to be cooled and warmed, with glass that changes reflectivity according to the amount available on a particular day, with our own recycling plants to keep us in a fresh supply of water, the liquid gold of the 21st century, and with farms to keep us in a supply of fresh food through the working day. Now, how close are we to the truly smart town or smart city? Well, that's certainly a matter for debate. But one thing that I can tell you we are absolutely certain of today is that the major revolutions in lifestyle, in technology, in ethics, and in values that will underwrite this smart age are already with us today. The first of these, of course, is the most recognisable, the globalisation revolution, which is having a big impact here in southern Africa. There are 3 million people added to the world's cities every week right now. 54% of the world's population live in urban centres today. By 2030, something like 55% of India will be living in cities. And the Chinese government, get this, expects 230 million people to move into cities in the next 20 years that don't even exist yet. So urbanisation is a key plank of the globalisation revolution. And it's not just mega cities that are driving growth today, it's mega regions. Mega regions are pipelines linking major cities. They're pipelines of innovation, inventiveness, new ideas, trade and commerce. In Europe, we have one of these. We call it the blue banana. It starts in Liverpool in the north of England, down through London, across northern France, into Germany, and down into the tip of Italy. And this region is driving GDP growth in Europe more than any other in Europe today. There are 40 of these mega regions in the world today, ladies and gentlemen, and though they represent just 18% of the world's population, they are remarkably responsible for 66% of its economic activity and 85% of its technology and science innovation. You have one of these, by the way, in West Africa. It's 600 kilometres long, linking Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana, and driving GDP growth more than anything else in that region. The other key plank of globalisation, of course, is mobility today. Immigration, emigration, and so on. In the world, in 2015, 244 million people, that's 3% of our population globally, were living in countries outside their country of origin. I, like Phil, are one of them. I've been a migrant twice in my lifetime. I came from Australia, Melbourne, to Scandinavia, Copenhagen, Denmark to be precise, some 26 years ago. And then 12 years ago moved to the UK. So I'm a migrant myself. And many people like me are economic migrants. We move for opportunities with work and opportunities for our families. But of course, a growing number now are moving for other reasons. Refugees and asylum seekers, fleeing crises of one form or another. And that's not really surprising when you consider that 8% of the world owns 82% of its wealth. And in the age of Instagram, it's quite easy for people, even in Africa, to get a photo on a smartphone of what the other side are living like and say, I'd like a little piece of that action, thank you very much. Now, in the developed world, where I live, without migration, we would die within 1 or 2 generations. Without migration, properly managed migration, we wouldn't be able to keep our GDP levels as high as they are because our fertility rates don't match the replacement rate. The replacement rate on average in the developed world is 2.1 children for every woman. The 0.1, by the way, is because of mortality among children. It makes sense. You've got to have 2 people to replace mum and dad just to keep a current level of population. In Europe, though, the average is very small. The fertility rate's just 1.5. In Spain, it's 1.27. Every generation of Spaniards now is 40% smaller than the one that went before. Italy's president recently gave a date by which he said, if we don't do something, Italy will be extinct. The Portuguese president did a similar thing not too long ago. Now, here in South Africa, you're moderately blessed in this regard because you have a fertility rate of 2.41 children for every woman. You can be thankful for that. Thank you, ladies. We appreciate it. The net migration rate here is a pretty healthy one too. In 2012, it was 600,000 people coming in every year. That's the net migration, obviously. The amount coming in minus the amount going out gives you the net. So most of those come from Zimbabwe, a large number, increasing number now coming from countries like India and China. Now, globalization's given us some great benefits, certainly in business and in lifestyle. It's given us the sharing economy. I don't know how many of you travel a lot. I'm sure some of you do. And you will know that in cities like London, where I am, in New York, in Berlin, in Paris, you can own almost anything, from a car to a bicycle, to an electric bicycle, to a motor scooter. You can even own an apartment or a room within an apartment. Share ownership has crept into education now. How many have heard of the massive open online course, the MOOC? A couple of people, great. Schools like Harvard, Stanford, MIT realizing that they can provide entire courses free of charge to anybody who has access to the internet. This year in Britain, we've gone one step further with the massive open mobile course, the MOOC. People can do entire courses now on their mobile phone app, and at the end they are awarded what they call a nano degree. I think that sounds pretty sexy. I'd like to have a nano degree. Shared economy and education. Now, this is happening now in Africa. Uber is in 9 African countries in the last 2 years. Airbnb in South Africa saw a 250% increase in travellers in the years 2014 to 15. So you are now part of the sharing economy. And the sharing economy, given to us in part by globalisation, is changing medicine with what I call social medicine, where people exchange their data in order to find new ways of managing a condition. This man, Salvatore Iaconesi, is a robotics engineer and artist in Italy who was diagnosed a few years ago with cancer. But rather than simply waiting for the doctors to do their thing and hope for a cure, he put all of his complicated data online in layman's terms and set up his own website. He invited ideas on how he could manage or perhaps even cure the disease. Within a few months, he had over 50,000 suggestions. Within 2 years, he had over 250,000. Some of them a little on the kooky side, but many of them very sound. And I think more importantly, even than that, was that his site has become now a marketplace of ideas between 2 groups who seldom talk to each other, advocates of modern medicine and advocates of folk or traditional medicine. This is what I'm calling social medicine. On the flip side of the coin, globalisation has cost us some things. There are some problems associated with it. We're only starting to come to grips with these in government circles. One is the technology gap that it opens up. Something like 41% of the global population today are using the internet. And that is amazing when you consider that 40 years ago, we didn't have a publicly accessible internet. 41%. But it still means, of course, that 59% don't have any access to the opportunities that the internet affords. According to the UN, by 2025, 50% of the global population will have a smartphone. Now, that is remarkable. Think about it. In 2007, we had our first smartphone, the iPhone. This is how quickly technology is moving today through globalization. But that will still mean, of course, that 50% won't have access to the opportunities that a smartphone brings. Now, can I suggest to you this is very important, these issues of equality in South Africa, because the UN still says, as of last year, that South Africa has more unequal cities than any other nation in the world in an economic sense, but also in terms of technology. Johannesburg is listed as the least equal city in the world, only marginally ahead of East London, Bloemfontein and Pretoria. And of course, associated with globalisation, there are emerging underclasses in some countries. Germany, Mark Wilkinson, who's here today, can tell you this from Berlin. Germany has an emerging underclass of highly skilled industrial workers who are now globalised out of a job, and according to one study 2 years ago, now sit at home drinking more than their fair share of alcohol, watching daytime television, and having absolutely no interest in further training. This is because of globalisation. Our second revolution is the digital revolution. In 1986, the world's technological capacity to store information was at the level of 2.5 billion gigabytes globally. By 2007, that 2.5 had grown to 297 billion gigabytes globally. Today, right now, we add 2.5 times 10 to the power 18 quintillion, 2.5 quintillion bytes, keystrokes of information every day to the global database we call the internet. Digitisation is here to stay. Look at South Africa's stats. 26.84 million people in this country now are internet users on an active basis. 49% penetration of your population. Active social media users, 13 million today, 24% penetration of your population. But here's the whopping big one, mobile connections. 85 million connections, that's pretty substantial. Essentially, every person in your country has something like 1 to 1.5 mobile accounts, which in Africa is substantial. And there are great benefits with digitisation too. There are open innovation benefits. Some of you in the last 10 years as business leaders have started working with private or public sector organisations you would never have worked with before. Walls are coming down. Why? Because we realise that global and national problems require convergent solutions. And so we have the medical sector working with IT, working with additive manufacturing to give us the possibility within about 8 years of 3D bioprinting. Technologists now are already developing 3D printers that can use or work with cellular materials similar to that in our bodies. And the goal is within 8 years, and it's realistic, we may be able to reprint an entire human organ like a kidney or a liver for transplant purposes. Maybe within 15 years, an entire human heart. All because of this convergence, this working together. This is partly driven by the Internet of Things. How many have heard of that? It's been slow to get off the ground, but it's getting there now. Billions in time, billions of microprocessors, all hooked up to the internet, built into everything from your food packaging in the refrigerator, to your garden sprinkler system at home, to your heating and cooling in the house, to the wall paintings on your wall. This is the Internet of Things. It's already happening in major airports. The airport I flew out of, when you go to the toilet, after 40 flushes, a signal is sent via the internet to the cleaning staff to tell them to come and clean the toilet. Internet of Things. It's also driven by big data. How many familiar with this term? Of course. Big data analytics is a fancy way of saying we have supercomputers like IBM's Watson that can crunch all the numbers coming in from all manner of mobile devices. And then for the first time in history, they're able to analyze all that data and use it to predict certain types of behaviour. They're able to predict economic shifts. They're able to predict marketing trends. They're able to predict political voter patterns in elections. Big data is very practical now. It's being used to design better furniture, better cities in some parts of the world, and more effective crime prevention programs in some of the major cities in those nations.